welcome to Relish Books. Today I am finally doing my review of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It took me a long time because I was listening to it on audiobook and they were on CDs, which turned out to be pretty inconvenient because you have to listen to it on a CD player. So that's kind of why it took so long. Not because I wasn't interested in it, because I was pulled into this story from the opening lines pretty much. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is what I have been looking for and waiting for in a fantasy for so long on many, many levels. It's not a perfect book, and I do have I feel like it has some drawbacks as a novel, but reading it as a fantasy, as someone who enjoys like magical stuff and who enjoys good writing and I don't know, so many things. This book was amazing. One of the incredible things about it is that Susanna Clarke has somehow managed to fit into one book, and it is a big book, but fit into one book what I feel like is enough material if she followed up everything that she kind of introduces. Is enough material there to have made like a 20-book series. She could easily have done that, but I really admire and appreciate her confining herself to this one book that somehow doesn't end up being too overwhelming. It is a lot of information. The book is largely one of information, and I think, but that's the way she's writing it. It's presented from the whole setting of the story. It's about magicians who largely are studying the histories of other magicians, and the book itself is presented kind of like a history of the lives of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So if you read it kind of like this magical history book story, this huge amount of information and facts and all these things that are being poured on you makes a lot more sense. But I honestly, maybe there's too much going on, but I loved it. I loved it from the start. It does definitely have it does plateau a little bit. Has a very strong opening, very strong ending. The first quite a few chapters are really great, really gripping. And then the whole final set of chapters there at the end is amazing and super gripping as well. The last day, it was like due back at the library that day. And so yesterday I listened to it for like 3 hours. There's 26 discs, and each disc is like over an hour. So plenty of audiobooks are that long. But anyway, it was really, really enjoyable. I think the thing that's one of the strongest things about it, obviously the writing is really good, but I love her approach to magic, and the story is really different from anything else that I've read. I'm really curious to know, I know nothing about all the lore that she employs, the legends of John Usglass and the magic in England and the fairy stories and all these magicians. I did not research that at all. I have no idea if everything in that book is completely made up or if she was drawing from a lot of English legends. I kind of have the feeling the Raven King sounds familiar to me. I'm thinking that that's like a big legend, like a lot of mythology that she drew for the story, but I really don't know. I'm not familiar with those legends, so I have no idea how much stuff she was drawing from like legends and myths and how much of it was invented. Either way, she did an amazing job with it, and the special thing about the magic in her story is not so much the spells that the magicians use or the whole system of the way that magic works. The thing about her magic is the mental images that she's able to give you. Her magic largely is in these pictures. So often throughout the book, there are these times where people will have almost like visions, and you'll get a rapid series of descriptions of different things, and they just paint these quick, sharp, startling pictures in your mind, and it evokes this feeling of ancient magic and ancient countries and lands and the land of fairy and the Raven King's time. And you feel these things, even not being familiar with those legends, if they are well known. It was so striking. I don't know. I think this is why I say that I have been looking for a fantasy like this, because the book gave me such a strong feeling of magic and excitement, and what I associate with that feeling of fantasy like nothing else. I mean, I'm sure everybody has what they associate that with, but it felt like it felt like an adult fairy tale that's also meshed with, at this time, their modern world. It is dealing with the Napoleonic Wars. Jonathan Strange goes and takes part in these wars with the aid of magic. He aids Wellington. He works for him. The way that she also is so intimately familiar with England's history and everything that happened everywhere in all these battles, all these particulars. And it's also fun the way that she inserts magic and explains these well-known events, but with magical implications. I thought that was a lot of fun, and probably would be even more fun for somebody who's more familiar with that history than I am. But the characters are really fun. Yeah, the writing is just sparkling, and fortunately, I really want to read it in book form, but just because I want to read it again, to experience it again, because the narrator that I listened to, Peter something, I've forgotten his name, was really good. He did a great job. So I don't feel like I was missing any part of the experience really by listening to it on audiobook, but I do want to read it again in book form to get a better feel for it and to just experience the story again. Especially since I read it over, or listened to it over the course of a couple of months. I would like to read it more closely together to get a better feel for it. But again, there's so much happening in this book. You could study so many different aspects of it, so many different characters. It's a large cast of characters, not a whole lot, I guess, of super main characters, which is one drawback that I have. One criticism I would make is how certain characters seem to be in the book a lot without his really having developed them, and you realize way late in the story that they're actually important or actually not very important. Like, one of my biggest problems is that the story starts with John Segundus and Mr. Honeyfoot, and I really enjoyed those characters. I really liked John Segundus at the beginning. I didn't care for him as much by the end. But he sets up, like, when I first started listening to it, I'm like, oh, this is one of the main characters. But then after you've spent chapters with him, you realize he was just this introductory character. Honestly, you listen to a lot, or you read a lot of the book before you even meet Jonathan Strange. I was like going along, and I was like, am I ever even going to meet Jonathan Strange? Is like he not going to come into the book until we're halfway done? But it's really long, and I think that's why it feels that way. That you feel like you haven't met this main character for a long time. But yeah, the way that John Segundus is introduced and then just kind of dropped, I didn't really like that, because it really felt like he was going to be a main character. And then he doesn't actually really add anything very important to the story at all. So I thought that was weird. I thought that was kind of not the best storytelling. And then like characters like Arabella, who turn out to be very important, but you don't really feel a sense of their importance when you meet her. Even when you know that there are these bad things setting up to happen with her, but her character's not really developed. You get a sense for who she is, but it's a pretty straightforward picture. I think that that's something that I don't like about the book in general, is that it's so much about this magical history. And again, you have to read it that way. You have to read it kind of as this magical history story, because you don't really get a deep dive into any of the characters, and you don't really get a lot of character development. And what you do observe, you kind of observe from far away. you can kind of guess at what characters are thinking and feeling and the development that they're making, but their feelings are never explained, which if you've watched my channel before at all, you know that I hate for things to be over-explained. I don't want characters' feelings to be explained to me all the time, but I also don't want this bit of a distance feeling from the characters all the way through, which is really what I had with everybody. That's my one complaint. I liked the cast of characters. There were a lot of super interesting, fascinating characters. There's a large, colorful cast. They're really well done. She's an amazing writer. But you always feel like there's this distance. You always feel like you're kind of observing this, you're observing these things happening on a stage from a back seat, and I just want to be there with them and watching them develop and digging more into who they really are and their thoughts and emotions instead of, just being on the edge of things and never really knowing who these people really are, never really knowing who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, which I know that there's a lot of, particularly with Jonathan Strange, he's mixed up of a lot of good and bad, and I enjoy that in his character. I like that a lot, but you never really know the essence of what he is. The same with Norrell, because for most of the book, you feel like he's such a terrible guy, and he's kind of portrayed sympathetically at times, and he and Jonathan Strange, as it's kind of the whole book is pointing out, are really very similar, despite how different they think they are. They're really similar people. So while I like that they're complex characters, they're not just, oh, he's the good guy and he's the bad guy, I would have liked better to know just who they really are in their hearts, what they would and wouldn't do. And it keeps you guessing. I like that, but by the end, you're kind of like, okay, I wish it was more established who these people really are, because ultimately, as interesting as the magic is, and the fairy stories, and the way that the plot unfolds, all of that is incredibly interesting, but you still never feel really attached to any of the characters. So that would be my one complaint. I loved it as a fantasy, as a story, as this really exciting, striking, beautifully written magical history, but I just would like to know the characters better. It was just frustrating. People were really interesting, like Childemas, one of the most interesting and odd characters, and yet his character's never explained, ever. You never know where he came from, who he really is. You never know what his motives truly are. He's willing to do horrible things, but he also seems to be willing to do good things. So, and most of the characters on some level, not to that extreme, he's like the most extreme one, but all of the characters are kind of like that, where it's like, okay, I never really know. There should be at least someone that you can count on to be a good person. And I think Arabella is maybe kind of that person, but again, she's not developed and you don't know her very well, and you never get a glimpse into their minds. Their minds are closed off from you. You never know, how do they really feel about things? You know that Jonathan Strange and his wife love each other, but you never get past that surface. You always feel like you're looking at the world through a pane of glass, or maybe through a mirror, as would be more appropriate with this book. But with that problem aside, it is a stunning book. I don't know when I've read anything that was on the level of just information and creative mind work that went into this. So much creativity and imagination. It was really, really amazing. So I am so glad that I read it, and it was really a surprise because, like I said, I read Pyrenees recently, and it was fine, but nothing I thought super special. And Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is very special, in my opinion. So those are my thoughts on that fantasy. I would highly recommend to anybody who's into fantasy or into classics even, because I felt like the writing was really good. But let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.